And we're live.
Yay!
Hey
Hi
everyone.
everyone! We're going to talk about cumming, and I'm with.
Is that how we're kicking it off?
I have to say, researching this was such a struggle because I kept like getting really horny and then having to like go and masturbate because like research. How do like sexologists like deal with their jobs? I would never get anything done. But anyways, I'm here with Nicole from Pink Spots and
Hey, everyone.
Mexi from Mexi YouTube channel and Total Liberation podcast. And I'm Catherine from Catherine's YouTube channel, in case anyone hasn't already been here before. And we also wanted to just say that we started a Patreon for the first time, and we've linked it in the description box. But for the time being, all of our Patreon money is going to be donated to Nicole's sister Gina, who is currently having an incredibly hard time, and we have also linked her GoFundMe and PayPal in the description box. So if anyone wants to donate, I don't know, Nicole, if you want to mention a little bit about Gina's situation.
Sure. Yeah, for anyone who hasn't heard my sister's story, very high level, her husband had a stroke a couple of years ago and had a really hard time getting on disability. It was a massive stroke. He had to relearn a lot of things and hasn't been able to work. Took them a long time to get on disability. And when they finally got disability, it's like not even enough to cover rent. So my sister was a sole provider for their family. She's also his caretaker. And then she ended up working a job with a ton of overtime to try to catch them up on bills and things, and ended up getting.
That was me. That was me. That was me. I realized.
I was like, did someone else join the conversation?
No.
She ended up getting an injury. I think a stress injury from overworking. She also has fibromyalgia, and she was already disabled, and unfortunately, her conditions have kept her from healing. She's had to have more surgeries on her foot and her leg. They're not healing. She's in a massive amount of pain. There's a nerve pain that's happening and nobody knows why, and none of the medications they're giving her are working. The surgeries aren't working. She also has a hysterectomy scheduled next month, which is a good thing. Ultimately, she's wanted to get a hysterectomy because she has endometriosis, and she's hoping this helps her, but it's a lot. So they've been dealing with this. She's been injured for the last almost 18 months and been out of work for most of that time. And because of, capitalist bullshit, she hasn't qualified for disability or unemployment or anything that might help. And even if she did qualify for those things, they probably would be insufficient. So we're doing a massive effort to try to really help her get her head above water. And for me, as her sister, the biggest thing I want is for her to have space and time to heal and to not be stressed about money. Because from my own disability struggles, I think her being in a constant state of fear and panic is probably part of what is contributing to her nerve pain and her inability to heal. So we're hoping to raise, we have a very ambitious goal that we set, but we're hoping to raise enough money that she could be okay for the rest of the year, get through the rest of these surgeries, and just be able to relax knowing she's going to be okay. And then in that time, we're looking at maybe getting her a disability lawyer or advocate. Also looking at, alternative jobs if she's not going to be able to go back to her job anytime soon. So we're working on like longer term solutions, but we need a lot of help to just kind of help her right now and make sure that she's okay. So anything you can do helps a lot. And if you can share this on any platform that you might have, that also helps a lot. And we just really appreciate everyone's support. Everyone's been really helpful. We did a fundraiser for her last year, and that really helped a lot. So we just want to say thank you to everybody who's been so supportive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the reason that we got decided on this topic of masturbation is because I had an experience where I was with a man, and I was showing him how I like to masturbate, and he told me that the way that I masturbate is really like purely relies on strength and velocity. And I was at first like really affronted by this. I was like, I can come however I want to come, I can masturbate however I want to. And it's true that obviously I can. But actually, when I was exploring and like thinking about it, I realized there was like so much truth to what he was saying. And then it got me onto this little journey where I started to explore different ways of masturbating that didn't purely rely on strength and velocity, and realizing that like there are so many other forms of masturbation, and how I'd internalized maybe some harmful ideas around masturbation and even what I masturbate to and things like that. So yeah, we first want to discuss the history of masturbation, then go into some of the harmful forms of masturbation, and then talk about some of the benefits of masturbating, some tips on masturbating, and yeah, that's about it. So let's start with the history of masturbation. Actually, I wanted to say some disclaimers first, because yeah, we're gonna probably mention the sexual assault, but I think only just like briefly. We're not going to go into any detail. So yeah, just in case that's like a content warning. And also, of course, asexual people exist, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But we're definitely not trying to say that everyone should masturbate, or that it's for, yeah, and even if you're not asexual, you still don't have to masturbate, obviously. But yeah, just to, yeah. And so yeah, in general, masturbation has had a history in which masturbation has been seen as shameful. People often feel really guilty. It's the type of thing that most people don't really talk about. Oftentimes it's like you might be just laying next to your partner and then like sneakily go into the bathroom for a sneaky little wank, and then like come back feeling sheepish, like you've done something really naughty, and or like trying to silently like masturbate whilst your partner is sleeping, and like trying not to wake them up, and then you wake them up and then it's awkward. And so in general, it's something that we feel is kind of, yeah, like not something that we really like to discuss. And I also think that there are some gender differences, because I think it's much more usual for men to be taught that they masturbate from a very young age, but then that can also put so much pressure on men to be forced to feel like they need to masturbate. Whereas for so many women, you're usually socialized into believing that, oh, like masturbation is shameful, it's not something that we do. Like I didn't start masturbating until I was 18, because I didn't even realize that it was a thing that women could do. I thought it was just like a man thing. I didn't even realize my vagina it was possible. And yeah, and a lot of this relates to Christianity as well. In general, Christianity taught many of us that, or historically, like masturbation has been a sin. And I definitely had that messaging from my mum that was like, oh, you can't masturbate, otherwise you're going to hell. And so I just didn't even like it didn't. But I remember when my mum first said that to me, I was like, why are you telling me this? This is something you should tell my older brother. Because I didn't even realize that I could masturbate, and so I was really confused. But anyway, and then I think so much of this also relates to capitalism, as everything does. And it's particularly how in the late 18th century, early 19th century, apparently anti-masturbation became like a really strong force. And a lot of this relates to what Caliban and the Witch talked about in her book. Silvia Federici talked about in the book Caliban and the Witch, about how the body was turned into a machine for the use of capitalism, and the body just basically had purely a work function. So anything non-work related was seen as negative. So like your body was just there to produce more children, like your reproductive organs were seen as something just like to churn out more children. So any kind of sex that, or sexual act that wasn't purely about penis and vagina trying to create the next labor force, was seen as like negative. And also our bodies in general were just there to work. And like, so if you took time or leisure or playtime to like pleasure yourself, that was like time away from just like purely having a work function. And Foucault talked about how any form of sexuality that couldn't support political, religious, economic function was bad and negative, and how through masturbation, and he said in a quote, one is in danger of compromising not so much his physical strength as his intellectual capacity, his moral fiber, and the obligation to preserve a healthy line of descent for his family and his social class. So yeah, in particular during this time, vaginas were seen to have an economic function, not a sexual one. And then this also really strongly relates to patriarchy, because yeah, women were just purely locked into non-sexual roles of subservience, supportive roles, not being independent, and yeah, sex being about reproduction. And another aspect of this is that anti-masturbation was also a way to keep sex locked to heterosexuality, and this idea that you need a penis in order to have sex. And obviously with masturbation, it opens yourself up to the potential that you can have pleasure without having a penis inside of you. And yeah, that's not really great for like patriarchs and male desire to control female pleasure. So yeah, and then obviously there was a big movement in which vaginas came to be seen as dirty and impure, and how yeah, anything like menstruation was seen as dirty, and that also keeps us away from our vaginas, like it's like a scary impure thing to touch, and I don't want to be near to that at all. And I wanted to end with a quote, which I don't know where this is from because I saw it on like a tweet thread, but it says, one of the best ways to make a woman accept and conform to this double standard of behavior is to deprive her of masturbation. In other words, deprive her of her own body and the pleasure of satisfying her basic sex drive. Start early. Instill the notion that female genitals are ugly and inferior, and that their only social value lies in having babies. Avoid any information about the clitoris and life-affirming orgasm. Prohibit touching through physical coercion and the suggestion of supernatural punishment. And socially ostracize non-conforming women. Maintain the two sexual views of women, the virginal sexless mother and the fallen woman, the whore or prostitute.
Yeah, damn. Yeah. No, there's so much of that. I think I wanted to, well, Nick, first, did you have something to say about colonization? Because what I'm saying might kind of bridge into something else.
Yeah, I just wanted to include in that overall analysis that, you know, obviously we're three white settlers here, so we have a certain perspective or don't have other perspectives, but I do want to acknowledge that masturbation, intimacy, sexuality can be very complicated for all of us, but especially for colonized people, because one of the mechanisms of colonization is to create kind of a sexual barbarism for the people that you're colonizing. And I think for a lot of people, that has been deeply ingrained in them for a very long time, and it's deeply internalized. And so that can definitely interfere with the way that we engage with our own bodies, you know, even in the privacy of our own homes. I know, obviously not a person of color, but as a disabled person, that is something that kind of I have to process and grapple with when I think about being sexual with myself, or how I feel about my body or my sexuality. So I just want to put that out there and also include it in this analysis that, you know, colonization has weaponized sexuality, particularly of people of color, in a way that can affect all of us, but again, particularly people of color and how they approach themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such a great point. And I think what Catherine was saying about like Christianity obviously ties into that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but no, I was just gonna kind of bridge off of what you were saying about how like you didn't even know how to masturbate until you were 18, and just how, as you said, you know, the male gaze really frames masturbation like it's very, very normalized for people who are socialized as male or who identify as male, and it's seen as just something that like, okay, women don't need that, right? Just in general, it's like, yeah, women don't need sex, right? Men have this biological urge that they must satisfy, otherwise they'll get violent, and we need to do everything we can to make sure that we cater to that need. Otherwise, look out, society is going to crumble. But like women, not like they don't need that, right? And yeah, like for me, I actually talked about this in a video that I made on sex and socialization, but I privated it. There's a lot of good stuff in there, but I ended up like, just saying a lot of kind of liberal stuff and recommending things that I wouldn't recommend now. But I was talking in that about kind of like my first engagements with masturbation, and I honestly stumbled upon it when I was like 8 or 9. Like I was very young, but and again, I think this goes back to like the way that I was socialized. Like I was more socialized not to identify with necessarily how other, like, I mean, boys at that time, but like how they looked and just kind of like being objectifying their appearance, but more so about like, the qualities they have and to be really romantically involved in that. And then so I'd be thinking about these like guys that I had crushes on and just like humping a pillow basically because I stumbled into figuring out that like, oh shit, this feels really good. And then this like miraculous thing happened. And I'm like, oh, wow, like it was just, amazing. And I had no idea what that was, but I obviously I kept doing it. And then eventually I figured it out. But like, yeah, it's so wild that, young people socialize as women or who identify that way, like you're either going to stumble upon it or you're just not going to know. I mean, yeah, I knew people in university who had never masturbated, had never orgasmed, because they were so disconnected from their body. It just was not normalized for them at all. Right. And I think that's so problematic in so many ways. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure things are probably different now, like Gen Z and below, I think with the advent of the internet as well. But yeah, I mean, it was always also just very normalized, like, men using porn to masturbate, but like women not, right? Like how many movies do we see where it's like, oh, the parents are like walking in on their son in their bedroom and it's like, oh shit, he's like in front, he's masturbating in front of the computer or something, or like he stole like his dad's magazines, because of course, like every married man has like stacks of pornography, but like the wife, no, because why would she, again, like why would she have anything like that? And yeah, like it's like not surprising to me, Catherine, that you had that reaction to your mom being like, oh, well, tell my brother, don't tell me, right? Because like that, we're so conditioned into that, right? And like to have a particular idea of masturbation as this thing that is like so connected to the male gaze, right? And to like this kind of like male milestones of sexual development that are really tied to, misogyny and objectification, and then women as just kind of like these like blank slates that like don't have any any desires or any need for any of that, right? So
yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of segues really well into talking about some of the harmful practices of masturbation. And yeah, to your point, Mexi, about the internalized male gaze, I think like a big part of my masturbation, even to this day, is like I think really reaffirming some really harmful neural pathways, and it's something that I'm really wanting to unlearn, because one of my primary sexual fantasies, and I'm kind of embarrassed to admit it, is this I guess you could say it's like a rape fantasy where I'm like kidnapped and then I'm like thrown down like and tied up, but then there's like a wall that is, or something that is put in between like the bottom half of my body and the top half of my body, and then the bottom half of, so like I can't really see what's going on, and then the bottom half of my body is basically being used by like a bunch of men in whatever ways that they want. And yeah, and like this is one of the quickest ways in which I can get myself to come, and one of my most like predominant sexual fantasies. And I don't think it's healthy, very healthy, like sexual fantasy, to say the least. But and I think this is like one way in which that we can so easily, I mean, we learn to get off on our own oppression. And I think that because of like my own history of sexual violence, I think like that really plays into it. And then there's also the fact that like we're constantly taught to that like domination and violence and our own like submission and control and things like that are attractive. But I think what this ends up doing is making me attracted to perhaps more dominating, violent, controlling types of men who I think are more likely to they're more likely to be able to turn me on, or for me to think, oh, I'm going to be sexually attracted to them, let me engage with them, because I'm training myself in a way to, to be turned on by these ideas or by these type of men. And I also think there's something about that specific sexual fantasy where I think maybe the wall in between my upper half of my body and the lower half of my body is kind of a way to separate my, I don't know, yeah, it's a form of disassociation maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And like, oh, my mind is not part of this. I'm separate from my body, and my body is being used in whatever way, but like I can't see, or I'm not part of anything that's going on because there's this wall. I don't know. It's probably something I need to like figure out or analyze what exactly this means. But yeah, just to say, I guess my point is that I think so many of us can so easily have like sexual fantasies that end up perpetuating like harmful systems of domination and control, and like, yeah, just like reaffirming harmful things. Not to say that I blame myself or blame other people for that, but I definitely think there are ways in which we can I don't know, learn to, I think I have been like slowly taking the time to try and have like other sexual fantasies, and it's really working. And I think that is then helping me to have more healthy ideas around sex and relationships in general.
Mm.
I'm like, I'm hearing you breathe, so I'm like, oh, she's gonna say something. Go for it.
Yeah, just to quickly add into this segment of the conversation, I think, these conversations are very complicated, because I think, like Catherine, everything you just talked about can also be tied into like kink and kink culture. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that we may get aroused by certain taboos or certain recreations of oppression. It's actually a very healthy and normal way to process those sorts of things, especially when we feel like we have control in the situation. It can help us to work through stuff. I think the thing that we can question in ourselves is, am I actually working through stuff? Or am I kind of stuck in a loop where this is all that turns me on and the only thing that I can do? And I can't imagine myself in a situation that didn't have some kind of violence involved in it. I know people, and again, there's no judgment here, but I know people who like cannot get off without certain kinds of intense or violent behavior. And I don't mean just physically violent. I mean like being called certain names or being put in certain situations. And there's no judgment in that. But I do think it's okay for us to kind of look at, what is my sexual landscape? And is there a way for me to use these activities to process rather than to just like recreate? And I think, that's a question for all of us. I think taboos are always going to be arousing. That's just kind of the nature of the taboo. I think there's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, I think you can also look at, all right, if I can only get off thinking about someone being very violent against me, can I work towards maybe having other sexual avenues as well for arousal?
Yeah, that's a really, really great point, and I'm glad that you brought that up. And yeah, I just want to kind of like dovetail on a couple of points. One, you mentioned, I'm glad you brought up dissociation, Catherine. And I also think it's important to just bring in the idea of how much sex has been commodified, right? Because yeah, so I guess bringing it back to like the normalization of porn and stuff like that, I think obviously increasingly it's normalized for, people of all genders from a very young age because of the internet. Like it's just literally like everywhere, right? And I know that for me, like when I was young, like I said, my earliest fantasies before I was exposed to any of that, before I even knew what I was doing, were very much like connected with like who I was and people that I actually knew, and kind of like much more realistic scenarios, but then like I was exposed to porn at a young age, and it really does, like affect your desires. It can rewire, parts of the pleasure centers of your brain and things like that. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of like fantasies started to get into my head, not only about like rape, and not even just like me being raped, or like similarly things like being like tied up or whatever. But like me, like raping people almost, you know, or like having like non-consent the other way. You know, incest stuff, like pedophilic stuff. And like, it, you know, obviously you're young, even if you're a teenager, I think like your mind is still very like, open to that, and it's very hard to like get those things out of your head, right? And again, it's not, and you know, I have done, obviously, like that's something that I chose to work on, and like, you know, I've obviously been able to like come a long way with that kind of stuff. And it's not to say like I don't want this to sound like, if that is your thing, like if that is something that you're into, like I don't mean to like shame that or whatever, right? Like I think it's very like clear that like these things are very omnipresent in our society, and it makes sense that like you would, you know, maybe latch on to things like that. So so I'm glad you brought that up, because it's like, yeah, it's not about shame, but I think that at the very least, what I don't understand is people kind of like leaping to the shame part and not actually getting, you know, curious or having any desire to have any self-introspection of like, okay, where is this coming from? Like what was I exposed to really like bring this on? Is this desire really my own? Because I saw this tweet, and I think this is really true. It's, your kinks are manufactured by a select few men in the porn industry and media. And really, it's like, yeah, the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie is basically like dictating our sexual desires, and not just through porn, like through movies, through advertising, through like all of the things that we just subtly take in on a day-to-day basis, right? All of that is informing our desires and how we think of ourselves and how we think of ourselves sexually. But what I found for me is that like there's a big difference. And maybe this kind of like bleeds into stuff we're going to talk into later, but like, I don't know, there's a difference between like masturbating, like obviously escapism is like fine sometimes. But when you're really doing it as this kind of like dissociative act, right? Where you're really like leaning into just like sheer fantasy, things that like would never happen. And you're kind of dissociating from yourself while you're doing that as well. I mean, it doesn't feel good. It's kind of like, people call it like cry wanking, you know, where it's like, doing it because you're like, oh, I'm stressed. And it becomes this like routine that I'm just like, oh, I'm just going to do this while I'm stressed, but you don't feel good after, you know, because it's a dissociative experience. And similarly, I think like what I find is that like when I was like watching those things, or when I was like masturbating, thinking of these kinds of fantasies that like were things that were like, you know, A, so fantastical that they would never really happen, or B, things that were, you know, aligned with oppressive systems that I don't believe in. When I would engage with people sexually, I found that it was more difficult for me to actually be present in those experiences and actually connect with the human across from me. It's like, you know, you're more in your head than you are with this person, and you're imagining all this like random stuff that you've seen, as opposed to like actually connecting. So I think it can really like impede intimacy. And also like the intimacy that you can have with yourself through masturbation, because that can be a really connected, you know, like deep experience where you're there with yourself, or it can be a really dissociative experience, where you're just like trying to escape your body and your mind, right? And I know that, you know, not everyone's goal is to actually have sex with another person, you know, like not everybody wants that. But I think that, you know, the way that we masturbate in this like either fantastical escapist dissociative way, like that can obviously really bleed into the you know, sex that we're having with other people. And I think that we've talked on previous streams about situations that we've been in heterosexual kind of dynamics, especially where we've been with men who it's very clear that they're like literally just masturbating with our bodies because like they are not there, right? Like they are in their head picturing this other fantastical thing, and you're not, you know, you're not there. And so, yeah, I completely agree that like, you know, kink, fetish and things like that, like it can be if it's like coming from a place of self-awareness, I think that it can be obviously like something that you're consciously choosing either for whatever purpose or just for fun, like just for play and self-exploration. But I also found this other quote that is a bit more critical. And it says like, our descent into fetish as the pinnacle of our sexuality as a society is an outgrowth of our disconnection from reality and from each other, and that they can be obsessive, compulsive, and dissociative addictions that impede intimacy and reciprocity and are rooted in self-absorption. And that sounds pretty harsh. And you know, obviously, like we said, I don't think it needs to be exactly that way.
Oh no. We lost her. All right. Well, she'll be back soon, I'm sure. Did you have something to say to add in, Catherine?
Yeah, I guess I just was, whilst Mexi was talking, I was thinking about this other tweet that I read, which I'm gonna reword probably really poorly, but it was something about the fact that in a white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal society, what we consider to be vanilla sex is actually the most like radical, subversive type of sex that we can be having because of the level of intimacy and connection that is involved. Hi, Mexi.
Hi, sorry about that. I went to try to click back to the thing, but I clicked the X button. So anyway, what I was saying was that like, obviously like, there is like potential for liberation there if we are coming from a place of self-awareness. But I do notice that like from my own experience that like, yeah, it can be quite dissociative and it can be a thing that actually takes you away. And I find that especially like, because like sex is so vulnerable, right? Even with yourself, even if you don't have another partner, it's still a very vulnerable thing. And I think it sometimes feels good to just like escape into these kind of like fantasies, because then you don't have to connect with that person. You don't have to be so vulnerable with that person, like sharing the most intimate moment with them. And again, you don't have to have that connection with yourself. And I think that like, no matter what you're doing, I just think, don't like, it's not about jumping to the shame, but it's about just looking at like, is this serving me, you know? And like, is this something that I'm doing that has the potential for like growth and understanding? Or is it something that I'm just, like you said, just like stuck in a loop of like escapism and like not knowing how to get out, you know?
Yeah. Like George in the comments brought up that they had a partner who got off on being dommed or dominated, which they were okay with, but started to feel like it was almost entirely out of self-loathing. And I think that's the tricky part when we talk about kinks, when we talk about fantasies and, you know, how we engage with sexuality is like, you don't want to judge someone and I want people's needs to be met. But I do think that there is some self-reflection, you know, to your point, Mexi, that should happen to say, you know, there's a difference between role playing and wanting someone to actually treat you that way, right? That's something that I feel I myself, and I've had a lot of friends, there might be stuff that we fantasize about, and maybe in a consensual kind of role-playing situation, that could be a healthy way to process stuff or just to play and have fun with power dynamics in a safe space. But, you know, we might, if we're going into situations where we just actually want someone to treat us that way and then we feel terrible afterwards, that's a different thing. And I think, you know, I think for better and worse, like there's a lot of protections around a lot of things now. You know, the internet wants you to be woke and down with everything. And I think in a lot of ways that's great, but I think it can sometimes, you know, I think especially for young people, to some of these tweets points, I think that maybe we're not making space for people to have that self-awareness, to have that introspection, and to say, well, hey, it's fine that I want to be choked, but is it fine that I want to be choked by men where I'm scared and I actually don't know if they're going to stop? Or maybe I didn't even ask them to choke me. They just started doing it, right? And we didn't have a conversation about it. Like, those are different things. So hopefully that makes sense. It's like, it's fine to have kinks. It's fine to be into certain things, and it's fine to have fantasies. But I think a lot of times, I I think a lot of people, men specifically, benefit from a lot of young people, women specifically, not having the ability to kind of parse these things out in a safe way. And, you know, I'll just say, like, I've had a lot of friends who have been pretty self-destructive and have gotten into these situations where they're like, well, I can't get off if a guy isn't choking me. And it's like, okay, that's fine. But like, if a guy doesn't want to choke you, he shouldn't have to, you know? And like, and if you're talking about, like, I had a friend who was like, oh, I don't even want a guy to ask for, I just want him to like slam me up against a wall and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, okay, then talk to him about that beforehand. Like, you know what I mean? But it's like the lack of consent is what is actually arousing them. And it's like, well, you can do those things in a safe way that's okay for both partners. But if you're running around here just wanting people to actually hurt you, that's a different thing. And again, it's not judgment on that. Like, I can understand why someone would have those desires and have that, you know, internalized stuff. But I think that a lot of times we get afraid to critique anything or to ask someone to look at these things because then it's seen as kink shaming or sex shaming. And I don't think that it has to be, especially if you're kind of hurting other people with your stuff. I've had a lot of guy friends who have been like, yeah, I had a girl who, like, one of my friends was like, I had a girlfriend who wanted me to punch her in the face. And I was like, that's fine, I guess. But he's like, you know, I asked if we could have a safe word. And he's like, and I really didn't want to do it. And she said, I was making it weird by having this conversation about, okay, well, if we're going to do this, how do we do it safely? And I think that's the kind of stuff, you know, so I know we're talking about masturbation today, but it's kind of tied into a lot of, you know, when we have sex with other people. And I think, like, yeah, if you have fantasies about this kind of stuff, that can be fine. But if you're wanting this to happen, if you're wanting bad things to happen to you in real life without consent and without any safeties, then I think, like, maybe it's time to just kind of think about it, look at it, ask yourself some questions. That's all. Not to feel shame and not to be shamed, but just think about it, you know, be aware.
Especially in those situations, because it's like, well, we're trying to fight rape culture. So like, we actually want men to, like, you know, understand consent or whatever. And if someone would do that without asking, that's probably a pretty dangerous person, you know? So it's like, you should, you know, be more concerned for your safety. But yeah, anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, I posted to Facebook once, someone wrote an article about how they felt like sex was getting less safe because so many kinks were made mainstream through porn. And obviously being mainstreamed, not in it, like, the representations are not consensual, right? They're representations of very non-consensual stuff. So I posted this article and I wrote about my own experience of, like, yeah, I've hooked up with people who have just started choking me out of nowhere or whatever. And someone popped into my comments like, don't shame people who are into choking. And it's like, how, like, can we just stop? It's like,
really.
I know kink shaming is a big problem. I get it. But like, we also can't talk over each other. Like, it should be okay for me to talk about whether I liked being choked or not. And I don't. I have a very sensitive little throat and I don't like anyone touching it. But like, regardless if I do or don't, that has nothing to do with the fact that, like, when I hook up with someone, they should not be choking me out of nowhere without asking me, especially a man who's bigger than me, who's on top of me, and who's inside of me. Like, that is a scary experience.
It's very scary. And I remember a time that was very normalized. Like, it was like, I don't know, maybe like 10 years ago.
Fucking everybody. Yeah.
Everybody had that experience. Yeah. And I was just like, what?
Yeah, I also think that with this rise of, like, no kink shame, sexual liberation culture, obviously sexual liberation is good, but like the type of sexual liberation that we are seeing is often just like, be down for everything and hypersexuality and all these things. I think that can also lead to so much performative masturbation as well, because we feel like we need to I don't know, like have all these like sex toys and all these different positions. And I feel like sometimes in the past I would be masturbating, not so much how I wanted to masturbate, but already like thinking, oh, if a man were watching me, would this be sexy to them? Like, let me arch my back, let me stick out my ass. Let me like rub my body in a way that doesn't feel good for me, but like I know that it would look good for them. And I think part of that is also because like the representation of masturbation in media is so of like female masturbation in media is terrible. Or I should say people with vaginas is terrible. And like generally it's just like, how is that person really going to come from that? It's just like a form of masturbation that is just catered is to the male gaze basically. And so yeah, that can mean that the way that we learn to masturbate is often just about like, yeah, trying to make ourselves look good rather than actually feeling good in the process of what we're doing. And I also just think that yeah, it can be very anxiety inducing, because I think we all feel like we have to be the most interesting and exciting, and let me show you like my big sex box of sex toys and like all these like contraptions and things that I have that like make me sexually interesting. And yeah, I think a lot of that also ties into like commodification of sex, Mexi, that you were mentioning, of how like I think sex has become something that is also like very a way to like sell more products a lot of the time. And then I remember once I was like masturbating in this like lingerie that was like so unbelievably uncomfortable, and it was like one of those ones where it had like a hole in the crotch and it was like digging into me on either side of my labia. And then like I was wearing a bra, even though I never wear a bra because I hate bras. I like to be free. And I was like, why am I masturbating in this fucking lingerie? No one is watching me. This is so ridiculous. But it's just like, I think it's all part of that this like very like sexual liberation, commodification kind of internalized stuff.
I think Chloe Deschanel just did a good video about what's it called? Sleazebag? Indie sleaze or something. But she talked about this era of basically, you know, it just sucks because it's like every step forward we take, there's a way that the patriarchy fucking finds a way to, you know, co-opt it and make it benefit itself. But I feel like, you know, sex liberation, sex positivity has all been co-opted in this way where it's a real thing and it can benefit us. But I do think it also does create, you know, these standards for young women in particular to perform in a different way. And it's really exhausting, you know. And then I think like you try to critique it, and then we go through these phases on the internet where you're just not allowed to say certain things. Or you're not allowed to not say the things that we're allowed to say, you know? So it's like, if you're saying anything outside of these like 2 sentences, then you're a fucking monster. And I feel like kink, you know, masturbating, sexual liberation, all of these things have just been part of that for a while, where you're not, I think it's maybe loosening up now, but you're just not allowed to be like, hey, some of this stuff kind of sucks, you know? Some of this stuff really isn't serving us. You know, I've talked about it before on here, but I went through my own phase of feeling like to be a feminist meant I had to fuck everyone all the time. And I couldn't figure out why I didn't like it. And then turns out maybe I'm demisexual, but does it even matter? What really matters is that I just didn't like it. And it should have felt okay for me to be a feminist without needing to fuck everybody. You know?
And similarly, I know some of my friends have said like that when they were really trying to be a good feminist, they're like, well, I gotta go home and masturbate because I gotta get in touch with my body.
Yes, this person, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, Decius. Great question. You know, masturbating in front of a mirror, self-love or self-objectifying. And it's like, it can be either. You know, it really it really depends on how and why you're doing things. I think if you have shame around your body, I think if you don't understand your body, then something like that can be really great. But I think it can also be fine to just like, you know, I usually just masturbate before I go to sleep, and it's kind of like part of my nighttime routine, and it's
Me
sort of
too.
boring and like not a big deal. And that's fine. Like, I don't resonate with the people who draw a bath and like wear lingerie and light a candle. And I think that's great, but it's just not how I engage with my own stuff. You know, for me, it's just not, it's not that deep. You know, it's the thing that I access sort of lazily, and that works for me, you know.
Yeah.
But for someone else, it might, all of that pomp and circumstance might be great. It might be very healing and very needed. But I think, yeah, this prescriptive way that like now it's like, oh, all girls masturbate and watch porn and like have vibrators. And it's like, well, that's great and fine, but like that shouldn't be the expectation either. You know, it should be that everyone's doing with their body what they want to do and whatever serves them best. And that might be never masturbating ever, or it might be masturbating 3 times a day, whatever it is. But we shouldn't have these expectations on us of how, like Catherine, to your point, like how we show up to be interesting. You know, these activities we do by ourselves shouldn't be proving our politics or making us more interesting. It should just be stuff we're doing because it's what we want to do.
Yeah, that is a great question though. And I think like for me, yeah, like it could be either way. Cause like Catherine, as you said, if you're kind of like seeing yourself in a bird's eye view from the male gaze and like using that to see like if you're sexy to the male gaze, then like probably that's leading towards the objectifying and like dissociation or whatever. But for me, because like, because I had those experiences where I was kind of really just like dissociating through masturbating, like to actually like connect with myself by like looking at myself. I feel like that would be really confronting, and really vulnerable. So I think that could be like, wow, such a radical act of self-love, you know, to like really get there like with myself, you know? So yeah, I think that's a great question.
Yeah, I at the last place that I lived, they had like mirrors all along the walls. So I found it a really great to like masturbate, but like if I had my legs like in the air and then like looking directly like at my vagina, but from a totally different angle, because I think I had so much self-consciousness about my vagina for so much of my teenagehood and childhood, because of the idea of like the perfect porn vagina, and because I didn't think that my vagina fit into like the aesthetic standard of like what a vagina should look like, that it was really nice to like see my vagina just like so fully, completely open, and from like an angle which generally isn't seen as like that like conventionally attractive. And just to be just like reaffirming, it was kind of this moment of like, how can I dislike something that brings me so much pleasure, and just like looking at it with love. And it was like a nice way of just like love, like it's like kind of a body loving experience. So yeah, I think it can really go in like like we said, go in many different ways. But I also wanted to mention, to your point, to both of your points about performativeness and like the sexual liberation stuff, that I think there's also like girl boss feminism also teaches us a sort of like do it yourself kind of mentality, or like, I don't know, sometimes I think, and also because we live in such an alienated, hyper independent culture, I think we can be like, I don't need anyone for my sexual experiences. I can do it completely by myself, like purely rely on my own masturbation. And and I had that for such a long time of like, no one can give me the amount of pleasure that I can give myself, and so I'm not engaging with anyone. And but I think the one of the reasons for that, well, I mean, one, because of the orgasm gap in general, but also just because I had like become so used to just like masturbating in one ferocious way myself, that like it wasn't really allowing for much possibility for me to get pleasure outside of this like one specific way that I was like making myself come. But I also just think that it's completely fine, obviously, for people to want to give themselves pleasure themselves and to purely want to masturbate, or for people never want to engage with anyone else. But sometimes I think it can just be a product of like individualism, hyper independence, girl boss feminism, of like, I don't know, it's okay to want to rely on other people for your pleasure sometimes, and you don't have to like purely think of it as this like hyper independent like thing to like reaffirm your feminism or whatever, or like your reaffirm your independence in a capitalist world that teaches us that that's like the most important thing. But yeah, I also wanted to talk about the NoFap movement. Because yeah, I think it's interesting because I think, yeah, again, like people don't have to masturbate if they don't want to, but NoFap seems to be a thing that has just been so adopted by the incel manosphere like situation, and I think so much of the time it's just like reaffirming all these like patriarchal ideas, because it's like it's not that they're disengaging from porn out of a desire for like feminism or like to because like of the harmful impacts that like porn has on our culture and society in general. It's more like I'm going to not go on porn and not going to watch porn because that makes me more masculine, or I'm not going to watch porn because like my reward for not masturbating, my reward for not watching porn is obtaining women, because like by not masturbating it's going to make me more likely to go out and obtain a woman. And often then, you know, you do wonder like to what extent that reinforces like sexual violence, because if you're like haven't masturbated in a very long time and then you're extra like aggressively trying to obtain women to like reward yourself for your efforts of not having masturbated for months, then yeah, I can imagine that would lead to a lot of like violent situations or pressurizing situations. But yeah, I think it's also just harmful if you're like reaffirming like it's just like reaffirming not masturbating as like a hyper masculine thing is then just like reaffirming like masculine ideals that we're trying to get away from, because we're just, yeah, obviously we don't want to like reproduce like these toxic masculine traits.
Yeah, it's really interesting, like that movement. I mean, it's like, I mean, you can masturbate without watching porn, right? So it's like you're again just like conflating the two, when like that's such a like capitalist patriarchal thing. Like you don't have to do that. But B, it's like it's just interesting where like that group of people takes that movement, whereas like there's other people who are like more like aesthetics, you know, like monks and like spiritual people who like also do NoFap, but it's like it's not to like, you know, to reinscribe their masculinity. It's like to like reach these like higher planes of like existence and peace within themselves. But it's just like really interesting, like where people like take these things, you know. And I think like, you know, obviously those people, it's like, well, that's fine. Like you're not like violent misogynist. But yeah. And like again, like it's like, well, if that like works for you, fine, or if you don't feel like masturbating, fine, right? But I think like again, like it just comes down to like the self-awareness and like why are you like, what are the reasons behind doing this, and you know, where is this taking you, how is it serving you and others, right? So
yeah, and I think it's an interesting question maybe to ask is how people. Because when I think about it, I think masturbation is something I do for myself, right? And then sex is something I do with someone else, not necessarily for someone else, but like for both of us. And I think toxic masculinity makes masturbation always about, like, a lot of men watch porn to kind of build up this like wish list of activities to do. So you know what I mean? It's not about self-pleasure necessarily. It's about keeping that hunger and that those expectations for sexual encounters active. And so the NoFap to me kind of like is the same thing, even though they're doing the opposite. It's like you're still using this thing that really should just be about you to project your expectations onto women.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's my biggest problem with porn in general. People who watch a lot of mainstream porn is that, I mean, we have a lot of problems with mainstream porn, but just in terms of interpersonal relationships, it's like, okay, fine. If you're going to watch it, then watch it, but don't come to me with these expectations that now you have this menu that you're going to order off of with my body because you've seen it and you think that this is now something that you should have access to. Not to say that like we shouldn't be able to find people to play with who have, you know, want to do the things we want to do, but that's not the dynamic that I'm talking about. So hopefully everyone can operate in good faith with me here. it's, you know, you're not masturbating just thinking like, oh, I just want to feel pleasure for a little while. I want to have a release and this will be nice. It's more like, oh, I'm so fucking horny and I want someone to do this stuff with, and you know. And I think that's such a different vibe. And I feel like NoFap kind of ties into that, where it's like, okay, fine, you took away the porn, but you're still having this expectation that like you're so fucking horny and someone should be releasing you in the way that you think that you should be released.
Yeah.
Instead of like meeting people and being like, okay, you know, we have chemistry and we want to do something together, and what do we both want to do and what's going to be joyful and satisfying for both of us.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I also think another problem with NoFap in general is going back to the whole point about Caliban and the witch and the capitalist mind over body type of dichotomy, the fact that we, like, this whole NoFap thing is just reaffirming these notions of like rationality and control and autonomy, and these like hyper masculine, hyper capitalist type of notions that like
Caliban all over again, right?
Yeah.
It's the using the mind to control the clean logical mind to control the beast of the body, or the machine of the mind to control the beast of the body.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then that always makes sex more scary because you're like out of control, you know. It's like this is this thing that you've built up and you think that this is the bestial part of you, and you're doing that with me, you know, and it's like that doesn't feel safe to me. Like I want an integrated experience, please.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Absolutely. Well,
can we talk about sex toys?
Yeah.
Because you brought that up before, and I was just gonna say, because you're talking about lingerie, and I was like, I actually have never ever owned a single piece of lingerie, and luckily, like, no man that like I've ever been with has ever like wanted that, but like I could never like wrap my mind around it, because I'm like, well, why? Like, it's just so part of the male gaze, obviously, because it's like the idea of a man dressing up in lingerie for us is like so ridiculous, but it's like just this expectation that like, oh yeah, women, and like it's so normalized that it's like, oh yeah, my partner got me this lingerie as a present, which is like not a present for you. It's a present for, you know, like what is that? So it's like, oh, I got you this so that you can dress up and like, you know, entertain me, you know? And I always just found that so bizarre, because I'm like, okay, like if like what, you know, the discourse says about male sexuality versus like women's sexuality is true, then like aren't men the ones that are more like DTF? So shouldn't they be the ones putting on the lingerie and like, you know, parading around for us to arouse us? Like, why am I arousing you when you're already like, arouse me, you know? Like why am I don't know, I just could never get around it, you know?
Like peacocks.
Yeah, like why would I buy this thing when we're just gonna get naked anyway? Also, like I was very like literally like, what is the point of this? Other than like playing into this like weird like male fantasy, like I don't know, it just seems so weird. But anyway,
well, just very capitalistic too, because now this is other more expensive underwear that you have to buy, that you only wear this like one particular occasion, and you can only wear it so many times before the, you know, majesty wears off and you have to buy a different one. So yeah, it's all very performative. It's fine if you like lingerie and it makes you feel sexy, but it's just, as like a concept, I've just never really understood it.
Yeah, I remember.
Like, I think my little boy short underwears, they're cute. You know, like that's what makes me feel sexy, and I just sleep with people who agree with me.
Yeah.
I bought a I remember buying this like white thong once, and then I had a shit and was wearing them, and there's like stains on the back. Like I was never able to ever actually wear them like with the intended partner I had bought them for. But what a like a waste of string, honestly.
A waste of string, very expensive string.
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, because you brought up sex toys before, and I was like, oh yeah, we should totally talk about that, because and I think sex toys are great and like can be great, but yeah, I think it also can like bleed into like how you engage with other people. So for most of my life, I did not have one at all, and I would just use like my hand or whatever, you know? And I guess to me, that's like a bit more, again, like of like a realistic thing, because I ended up getting this one and it's amazing, but it's like a dildo with like 2 little things here that can like stimulate your clit. And like, there's all these different settings. So like, and it sends these like electric like pulses, you know, like, and you can choose different rhythms. So you can like build up the rhythm or whatever. Like no penis could ever do this, you know? And so like, yeah, if you get really like hooked on that, right? But then obviously like, you know, sex with a partner that you really love, like it is so much better, you know, to me, it's to have that like really connected experience. Although I have had like really connected experiences with myself as well. But I found that like after a certain point, especially because when I was single, it was like, oh, this is great, you know? And then when I started to like have sex with, you know, my partner, which was like, you know, absolutely amazing. It started to feel like too much, you know, because then it's like, I just started to realize that like, I'm actually kind of like numbing myself out with this thing. Like it started to be like, really like, oh God, like these electric shocks are like a lot. Right. And so now I don't even like, sometimes I'll just use it to just like rub myself, but like not turn on the things. Because sometimes I felt that like, the frequency or like the shocking stuff, it would lead to these orgasms that were really quick and not very satisfying, because it was just a really quick rise and drop. It wasn't like a build up and then release. It was like a whoa, you know? So yeah, just something to think about. Yeah, exactly. And you're like, oh man.
You're like, damn it.
Yeah, you're like, what'd I do that for?
Yeah, sex toys are one of those things where I think, again, you know, it's like definitely supportive of them, but I do think they're also good to just kind of like be aware of them. And that's one of the biggest things, is that they can very much desensitize you to whatever, you know, just person to person sexual contact you might be having. And that can be okay. Maybe that means you incorporate sex toys into your sexual activity with other people. But it's just good to be aware of and to decide if that's something that you want or don't want. And just in general, also, the way we masturbate can definitely, I think we talked about this on one of our first streams on this channel, but the way that you masturbate can definitely impact, you know, how you experience other people. So it's a good thing to think about if you're having some difficulty or frustration getting pleasure with other people. It might be a good thing to look at, how am I masturbating, and could that be making it more difficult? Because like you said, yeah, a penis isn't going to vibrate and send electrical shocks through you unless you get to fucking Android. That's a little joke for my fellow Star Trek nerds. I've been talking about on my Star Trek podcast how bad I want to fuck Data. It's a whole thing. But it's so, and you know, I think also for people with penises, you know, if you don't use lube, if you use a very tight grip, like there's just so many things that you can do that can make it more difficult to have pleasure with, say, a vagina. So it's something, you know, I think it's okay to have sexual frustration and struggles. I think that's pretty normal, but I think, you know, it's a good place to interrogate if you're experiencing those and you want to change it. How am I masturbating? And does that make someone else coming into the picture very challenging for them to create the same sort of stimulus that I'm experiencing by myself? And I think this is especially important if you masturbate a lot. And this can also tie into porn, right? Like beyond what porn is showing you, which can interfere with some sexual interaction, it's also that it's visually stimulating you constantly. And the way a lot of people watch porn is they like kind of jump to their favorite clips, or they like hop around and they might watch different videos. And then even if you stick with one video, the way it's shot is, you know, you're constantly changing positions and camera angles and sexual acts. And so that can get you it can be very hard then to just have one human person or several human people in front of you. Like it's hard for your brain to get the same sort of stimulation. So it's something to think about. Like if I'm having trouble engaging with other people, look at how you're masturbating and just kind of say, okay, well, is this something that kind of invites someone else into it in the same way? Or can I take some of my self practice and move it into a group dynamic? That can be fine too. But so that's, with toys, I just want to like point that out, because I think the orgasm gap is very real.
Yeah.
And I think that can, people should be fine with you bringing sex toys in. I know some men get very intimidated by that, and they shouldn't. I can understand why, but like, people should be able to bring in vibrators and dildos and stuff and have that be fine. But it's also like, I think if we're hammering away at our clits with these toys, and then we're feeling dissatisfied with our partners, some of that might not be them being at fault, but some of it might also just be that we're literally like numbing ourselves, because that can happen. You can get desensitized with how you masturbate, no matter what kind of organs you have. And it's not, again, not to shame it, not to say that that's necessarily bad, but it is something that I know for myself. I keep my masturbation pretty simple and basic, because I like being able to translate easily over to having a partner, and not really, not having like, oh, my clit's going to be numb for 2 weeks. Because I rubbed it off with, whatever toy I had. And then I know we wanted to talk a little bit, I'm just going to touch on it briefly, but like sex toys for men, especially for like cishet men. Again, I don't want to shame anything, but I do think that there's something to interrogate about like fucking like a disembodied part of a woman. So I think, this is something else to kind of consider and think about as you're examining your self practice, is like, if you have these disembodied parts that you just sort of fuck, well, this is for cis gay men too. That can also, and especially like if that's paired with certain types of porn and things, it can also kind of condition you to see sex. Because I know when I've had sex with men, a lot of times like they do get really fixated on a body part, and I kind of can lose that feeling of like us being connected and playing together. It's fine if like body parts turn you on, but I think these toys can kind of enhance that sense of like disembodied parts just making you really horny, and like you're just very focused on like this part of a body that you want to fuck, and lose the sight of like there's a whole person attached to that body part. So that's something to think about as well.
Yeah, and I think also it's like the way, because it's like, okay, yeah, like a dildo could be like seen as like a disembodied body part as well. But when you're doing that, and then you actually like are with a partner, like you can't really control, you can like hold their back or whatever, but you can't really control like what your partner is doing. Whereas like for a person with a penis who is doing the penetrating, if you're just like holding the sex toy and like fucking it however you want, like you can similarly like hold my body and just like do that. And like, I don't have control really of what you're doing. Like I can tell you to stop, but like you're the one who's penetrating. So you're the one who does that, Yeah. And so, yeah, like if that's how you're engaging with your sex toys, like how many men have we had just like, again, just like grab your body and then just like do it. And I think this also, exactly. And I'm just like, okay. And I think that also speaks to what you're saying about like, having like too tight of a grip or getting numb or whatever, because it's like people will just grab you and do like this like hard and fast thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, sometimes I can't tell. And I mean, people with penises in the audience, you can let us know. Sometimes I can't tell if it's like, you're doing it because you want to last longer, like you want to numb yourself out or whatever, or like you just literally like, that's the level of like intense stimulation that you need to get off, which to me is like a bit problematic, like maybe take a look at how you're masturbating and whatnot. I mean, and I know that like, an uncircumcised head of a penis is going to have more nerve endings than an circumcised one. So like maybe for some people, like you do need just a stronger level of that stimulation. But like, yeah, there is something different about like being the penetrator and then like translating what you're doing to your sex toy to a human that like doesn't work out.
Yeah. Yeah. And Paul asked about dildos as well. And it can be sort of the same thing, but I mean, we have to examine power dynamics first of all, and like that's just it is just different, like men aren't chopped up in the same way, although like I said, I do think with gay porn that does kind of happen to an extent. But also like, yeah, we are technically fucking the dildo, but we can't really see it. So it's just a different, like, it's not so visual, because like when we're using it, it's, maybe we can see it, but it's not the same kind of thing. We're not like fucking the dildo in the same way that like someone could fuck an ass or a vagina or a set of tits or whatever. It's just different. But to that point, that is still something. Some people out there insist on having like a giant dick with their partner. And it's like, well, not everyone has one of those, and that should be totally okay. So maybe like, are you masturbating with a giant dildo? Maybe stop doing that or whatever. It's just stuff to think about. Like, how can I approach someone else's body?
Yeah.
In a way that allows them to just have the body they have, and for us to have a pleasurable experience together. Yeah. And I think sometimes, fucking these like things that are made strictly for physical pleasure and visual stimulation can just detract from that.
And I mean, like, my dildo is like bright purple and like smooth with like these.
Yeah.
It actually
that's how most of them. Yeah, that's how most of them are.
Whereas like you can get these, like, I mean, you can get like full on sex dolls, right? And like that's like a lot more normalized for men to have.
Stream.
Right. Like, but like there's also just like these very realistic like body parts that you can get, right? Which are not quite the same. But I think the control thing is like different, because it's like, yeah, sure. But like when I'm with a person, I can't control what they're doing. To the same extent that like they could control what they're doing to me, if they just kind of pin me down and do it, I
guess that's what I was trying to say. Like when you fuck a dick, it's like, sure, you're fucking it, but like it's just different than fucking like an ass or a pussy. It's just different, it's the politics of penetration is a concept I think about a lot. But yeah, there's just different dynamics to it, both visually and physically. And I can't tell you how many guys have like grabbed my hips and been like, all right, I'm gonna come, like, brace yourself. And it's like,
oh my
brace
God.
yourself. Get the fuck off of me.
Good God.
Yeah. But it is that idea that it's like, okay, I have to like fuck this thing right now and get off. It's like,
good God.
That's my body, dude. Like I'm still attached to it.
So
it's just something to think about. Again, definitely not vilifying sex toys. Just want to, spark the conversation of like, these things can be very liberatory. They can be very pleasurable, but there is also ways that we can kind of bleed them into our interactions with other people that might not be optimal. And it's okay to kind of think about that.
Yeah, why not learn says, unfortunately, porn and music have convinced a lot of males that women want their vaginas to be beat up. So that could be playing a role. And I'm like, yes. And I've actually heard like several people, even like some people that I know, saying like giving advice and being like, oh yeah, you got to like beat up the pussy. And I'm like, no, you don't. No, God.
I mean, unless the person wants it, then go ahead, beat it up. But,
totally beat it up. But we also did an entire stream about like the anatomy of the vagina and like pleasure and, nerve sensitivity and stuff like that. So it's not often, less than ideal to be doing that in terms of like sensation. But sure.
Yeah. I had an experience where basically a man just like was just continuously trying to pressure me not to use a condom when I was having sex with him, and he just would not take no for an answer. But a big part of it was that he just was like, oh, I just can't feel anything. I just can't feel anything when I'm inside you. And then he was like, oh, it's not you. And I was like, yeah, I know it's not me. But I think he was like, but he said it in a way that was kind of insinuating that it was me. Like I had some sort of massive vagina that he like got lost inside because it was just so big. And but then I watched him like wank, and I was like, excuse me, but and this is the most British way of saying it ever. Excuse me, but I think you're like it's the way like you holding your penis is like really tight, and
Mhm.
but it was like so like really like grabbing it and like
Mhm.
yanking it and pulling it. It's like no wonder there was like no lube, nothing, like no wetness. It's like no wonder you can't feel anything inside or when you have a condom on, because it's like yeah, like the way that you're masturbating. But anyway, I also feel that it's really, I find I have a complex relationship with sex and masturbation, just because I think like I often find myself when I'm having sex like going to these like go-to ways of like touching myself or moving or whatever that I know are definitely going to make me calm, because it's like because of the orgasm gap I feel like this desperate need to like I need to make sure that out of this sexual interaction like I'm not feeling objectified or I'm getting pleasure too, because otherwise I feel like I'm used, or this is like a like will end up being a very patriarchal exchange. But then I think that just ends up reinforcing just like what we talked about how you masturbate in a exact same way, or like you yeah, I don't know, not necessarily having like this sense of exploration or adventure or like play in the situation, because and I think it's just like so intimately related to patriarchy, because you're like I'm trying desperately to like not have a patriarchal interaction and to make sure I get my pleasure, but then that kind of desperate attempt is just then making it a very even more like capitalistic kind of exchange. So it's really complicated, because like I really want to like I get frustrated if I'm like touching myself during sex and they're like, don't touch yourself, I can do it, and then and inevitably they can't, but yeah, and it's I think like that also relates to like men
Don't
wanting
touch
like
yourself.
You're like, can you? Can you?
Like, what?
Yeah, and that's also like because yeah, men, because of like the patriarchy, like the penis is supposed to be the only thing that can possibly give us any gratification, and like it's kind of like they want to be completely in control of your pleasure, etc., etc. But I do think there is something to the fact that to the point that I do want to be open. I mean, like with the last person I was with, I was able to have orgasms in ways that I didn't even realize I was capable of, because I allowed myself to like be more in a playful kind of situation, and also because he was much more respectful than the usual people that I engage with. But am I making sense? Like the kind of the nuances of yeah, not wanting to always fall into the trap of like always having the one set way of masturbating, the one set way of bringing yourself pleasure, but then also wanting to still make sure that you're gaining pleasure from sex by doing the things that you enjoy. So I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that that I always hear people say like, "Oh, you need to touch yourself so you can tell someone else how to touch you." And it's like I don't really ever I don't know, for me it doesn't really translate. It like the way that I am with myself isn't really how I am with other people. I don't think it necessarily has to be a one-to-one. And so to your point, like I think what I'm trying to say is like I think there's been a lot of pressure on young women in particular to like know their bodies through masturbation, and now we're supposed to show up in a bedroom knowing exactly what we want. And it's like, but a lot of and this goes to the complexity of like consent conversations and stuff like that. I don't know if anyone's read the book Tomorrow Sex Will Be Good Again, but she kind of talks about that in there. But like a lot of the pleasure of sex with another person is the surprises, is the like, oh wow, I didn't know that felt good, but it does, and I think there's this misunderstanding that you can't explore your body with someone else, but you absolutely can. I just think a lot of us don't get the opportunity because a lot of us don't have partners that we have that kind of comfort and safety with. But I think it's okay to your point, Catherine, I think it's okay for us to just masturbate without it needing to be political, without it needing to like prove something. I think it's okay to just kind of just masturbate and have it be a thing. And I think it's okay for sex to be a related but also different thing. Because Cause yeah, I find that stressful. Sometimes, you know, someone's like, "Oh, what do you like? Like, tell me what to do." And it's like, I don't know, just start touching me, pay attention to when I moan, and like go from
Yeah.
there. You know,
Yeah.
like, not that I wouldn't give someone any direction, but I just think there's this idea. I always get confused when people say like, "Oh, like you'll know what to tell people to do in bed," and it's like I've never like told someone what to do in bed. You know, it's like. I don't know. It's more loose and flowy than that. It's like, obviously I say, like, if I don't like something, I'll say I don't like it, or I can ask for specific things. But I think there's this idea, like the show Sex Education. I don't know if either of you have seen it, but they kind of show that in there. Like, this girl is having trouble orgasming with her partner. And so she masturbates. And then they have this next scene, because I guess she hasn't really masturbated before or something. Anyway, she like ends up masturbating like constantly and like getting off all the time. And then there's a scene with her and her partner, and she's like, "Okay, do this, move a little to the left, do exactly that." And it's like, I have never done that with someone before. I've never like known my body in a way where it's like, oh, there's like XYZ path you can take that's always going to get me off.
Yeah.
Because for me, it's almost more psychological.
Yes.
And I think, you know, like Mexi, for you too, like we're both demisexual, and I think that factors in. I think for us, it's less about the mechanics than it is about the mindset. And so I just want to put that as kind of like a general comment, but I just think there's a lot of pressure on us with masturbation to be like fucking sex gods. Like we're masturbating to become amazing in bed and to be like these girl bosses who know exactly what we want, you know. And it's like, I don't know, for a lot of us, I don't think it works that way. I think it's just something we do by ourselves, and then sex is like this other thing.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like telling someone specifically, like, do this now, move this way, now move this way, like that actually takes me out of the mindset. Like then I'm like not in it, right? Like then, you know, then I'm just like giving instructions.
Like skin rubbing on skin, because it's like I've lost it, and I get like very nervous. I start feeling like a lot of pressure, and then that makes me shut down.
Yeah. But like in another way, like it's like, okay, I understand why people say that too, because you know, like when I was much younger and, you know, I masturbated, but like, I didn't really translate that into my partners. And I did view masturbation and sex as something that was totally different. But I think like, you know, some of like my early partners or like people that I would be with, like you just, like you explore. I mean, I guess this is how like, you know, porn and media like really fucks us up though, because like you explore, but like you're exploring based on like scripts that you've basically seen, you know, presented to you through this kind of mostly harmful media. So then like the exploration is more like performance, and then you end up like, you know, not actually like getting as much pleasure out of it as you could, right? Whereas like when you get more comfortable with it, I feel like there is something to be said there. Cause you know, like my one friend who, or like you, Catherine, I don't know your experience, but yeah, my one friend who like had never masturbated, never orgasmed until she was in college, like it can lead to you having like a lot of bad sex and not knowing that it's bad, you know, and like, and kind of thinking like, well, I guess that's just what sex is, you know, because that's the way that it's presented in like this media. And like, you don't really, but I agree that it's like, it is a separate thing, because like I was masturbating that whole time, even if I was having bad sex, and that wasn't necessarily translating into me having better sex, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of it's like, how are you two engaging with each other? How is that person treating you? More than like, oh, are they doing that thing with their tongue? I always hate that in fucking movies and stuff. They're like, did he do that thing with his tongue? And it's like, there's no thing with your tongue. Like there's no universally pleasurable thing. Like everyone's body's different. Everyone's into different stuff. It just, I do think it's important to like, you know, to know if you can have an orgasm. I think that's a good thing to know, because not everyone can, and not everyone wants to. I think like kind of generally knowing, are you like a clit person? Are you a vaginal person? Are you a butt person? Like whatever, like that can be good to know. But yeah, I don't think like, I love this comment from Das, rhymes with bass. Am I saying it right? I think part of know yourself first is an effort to avoid vulnerability with a partner. And I completely agree with that, you know, and I think a lot of the tragedy of our sex in general is coming from a place of everyone thinking they're supposed to already know everything. And the way that I approach sex and the way that I always have just intuitively is like the first time I have sex with someone, or the first several times, I know nothing. And we're playing and we're discovering. It's like an adventure together. And I think like if we could all be more comfortable with the vulnerability, with the newness and the unknown, I think that we could all be having much better sex without the pressure of like everyone supposedly knowing exactly what they're supposed to do before anyone's clothes even come off.
Yeah, and I think it's also just like reaffirming the hyper importance of like the climax, like it's the product over the process of it. It's like, okay, like know what you like is like, okay, know how you like to come, but like what about just like the pure pleasure of the moment? It doesn't matter if it doesn't lead to like the orgasm, but just like like right in this moment, I'm enjoying this, I'm doing that. And yeah, you're so right. Actually, what you're both saying is making me rethink my own sexual sex, because I'm like, yeah, you probably are closing yourself up to so many possibilities of like discovering new areas, or like of your vagina, or like new things that like turn you on, or like new, because you're always like, oh, I know I like exactly this one thing, and then it means that you don't necessarily realize, oh, actually, like there's a mole on my butt cheek that actually I like to be bitten or something. Like
that's very specific. Yeah, or just stuff like I love having my neck kissed. There's no way for me to know that without someone else having done it to me. You know what I mean? Like there's like I had masturbated for a long time before I was with my first partner, who I did all kind of my first stuff with, and I just like our experience was just very playful and open and safe, and I don't feel, you know, I guess I'm glad I masturbated before I was with that person, but like it didn't really matter that much either because it was safe and it was curious. And I think that I don't know, I just feel like we should be talking to young people about that, about how the dynamics of your sexual relationship should be curious and safe and playful. And yes, sure, you should know yourself to have fun by yourself, whatever. But like, I think it's another way that we bypass, you know, what we should really be getting to the root of. We also have these conversations about consent where it's like get enthusiastic consent, but we don't talk about like what does that dynamic actually look like when your clothes come off after you've consented? Like, how do you make that a good experience? So I guess that's what I'm trying to get at here is like, sure, masturbating can be informative for sexual partnership, or it can't be. It kind of doesn't matter, but like it's more about how we're approaching each other and the willingness to understand that everybody's different, everyone's going to want different things, and to like approach it from that aspect instead of feeling like we have to approach everything like we already know what to do. I've been thinking a lot about doing an episode for like cishet like boys or men about like having sex for the first time. And like one of the things I would say is like look at the fucking vagina when you put your dick in, because people who are having sex for the first time think they're not supposed to look like they're supposed to just know somehow where it is and how to get it in there, right? And it's like embarrassing when you miss, but of course you're going to miss. It's this weird hole in the middle of a bunch of other stuff, and everyone's at a like slightly different angle, and if you're doing it for the first time you kind of don't know where that person is. So it's just things like that, like just look at the pussy, you know, like it's fine. It doesn't mean you're bad at sex, and it doesn't mean anything about like people who have had sex a million times can still do that. You know, it's like we just need to be open, and we need to be okay with like the fact that sex is a little bit clumsy and it's very vulnerable, even if it doesn't mean much, even if it's a one night stand or whatever. Like it doesn't have to be a huge ordeal, but it's, you know, like if I think about it like cooking, like if I'm cooking for someone for the first time, I know how to cook. I'm a good cook. I make good food. but that person may not like garlic, or they might be allergic to, you know, oranges or whatever. Like, these are things I need to know. So every time I cook for someone, I'm still open to learning about their particular preferences and accommodating them so I can make them a good meal. Sex is the same way. And that's how, like, yeah, I can become a good cook by cooking for myself and build the basics, but it's also different when I cook for other people.
Yeah, it's very true.
Very
Yeah,
well said.
and yeah, Kalpik said that, you know, the know yourself first is a good overall statement, which you know, I think we definitely agree with. And I think this also goes back to what we were talking about earlier about like the dissociation versus connection, right? Because it's like, well, yeah, like, are you using masturbation as a way to know yourself, or to dissociate from yourself and just like dive into fantasy or porn or like whatever, and not actually like really, because I mean, like, there's a whole website called OMG Yes that I always wanted to explore, because it's like all about you know, pleasure for the vagina, and like, you know, I guess like these like testing like a bunch of people with vaginas, and like finding things that like are very stimulating, or like, you know, like ways to do things that are, you know, exciting for vaginas or whatever. So I always did want to you know, look into it, but yeah, it costs money, so I haven't done it. But you know, like things like that, where it's like, you know, there's even a lot for me that I could probably explore much more in terms of like getting to know myself, right? And I think that is like really great. But you know, yeah, it also depends on like what dynamic are you establishing with yourself, and are you going to actually know yourself better through what you're doing or not, you know?
Right. And I don't know. I just think, I think for me, it's kind of like our attitudes around like therapy and healing, where it's like, go to therapy, fix your stuff. And sure, you know, we all should, whatever. You know, I have my issues with the therapy industry, but sure, we should all work on ourselves. But like, it's also just very individualistic and very unrealistic to think that like, if we have interpersonal trauma, that like we're not going to heal interpersonally. Right. And I feel the same, like, know yourself first is great, but if you're talking to like a 14-year-old, that 14-year-old doesn't know anything. Like, not to be dismissive of young people, you're amazing, but you know what I'm saying? Like, you just haven't fully grown into yourself yet, and you're probably in the middle of like teenage bullshit, and you know, like, having your first sexual experiences, and now you're supposed to like know yourself first. Like, that's just not realistic, and I also think it's just not necessary. You know, I think if we made sex safer and more pleasurable in general by talking to people about masturbation, and also how we can be with other people in safe and fun ways, then this, you know, we don't need to like come to the table fully knowing ourselves. We can be safe and be held by other people to kind of explore and find things out.
Yeah.
Yeah, like for me, my switch in the way that I masturbate came like to now I feel like masturbating only like relatively recently to like sexual fantasies that aren't rapey, actually came from me having like having that really positive sexual experience, that like yeah, that was like really like liberatory for me, and like opened me up to a whole different sexual cosmology. And that was then what like was the catalyst for me to have to then like start to masturbate in different ways. And yeah, I guess I could have started to masturbate differently in more, and like even the way that I make myself come now is like, yeah, like making myself come in other ways than what I used to. And yeah, like I never thought that I could come just purely clitorally, because I thought I was like always an internal orgasm person. But I mean like the external clitoris. And now, yeah, then I started masturbating like that. And I think, yeah, you could, again, I could perhaps have like got to that point without like having that sexual experience, but like the sexual experience really helped. And yeah, and I think, yeah, purely, I guess it relates back to the whole point of hyper independence, girl boss kind of like culture of like doing everything yourself. But
and just trying to create this idea that like masturbating is exactly the same as sex, and it's just not. Like, there's not other people there. That changes things quite a bit. And it's like, it's okay for those to be two different, again, definitely related, but two different activities. Like there's angles that you just could not get to on your own or whatever. It's like, I think that's the joy of sex, right? It's the fun is like the unexplored and the unknown and the surprises and the finding someone who can like do something to you that you've never had done before that you enjoy. And I think that like, I just think we're trying so hard to make sex this clean, safe in a very like capitalist sense activity, and it's just not. It's messy, right? And it's open and it's unknown, and I think that's what's beautiful about it, and that's also what's scary about it. And I think like we should be more embracing of that rather than telling everyone to go home and buy their first vibrator and know themselves and come to a sexual encounter with your list of like your roadmap of how to make me come. It's great if you're one of those people and you know that, and that's fine. But I think it's like also okay if people don't have that. Can we just talk to them about how to approach things differently with each other, you know? And that doesn't help. Like if you're talking about a cishet man, like him masturbating is not going to help him know like someone's body better.
No.
Or even necessarily his own body better. You know, like men are not encouraged to be sensual with themselves. They're not encouraged to explore certain parts of their bodies. So sometimes it takes a partner, you know, being like, can I lick your butt? And then being like, wow, that actually is quite pleasurable, you know, like whatever. I've used like a lot of people with penises actually really enjoy vibration, you know, and it's like they would never have known that because why would they have bought any kind of vibrating toy, right? So it's like I think it's cool and fun that we have stuff to teach each other and to learn from each other. I just think people should be more empowered to not be treated like shit, and I think people should be taught to not treat other people like shit.
Yeah, that's it, really.
I mean, smash the patriarchy. Done.
Yeah, very, very well said. Yeah, I guess we could go on to some of the benefits of masturbating, or like the positive, good parts of like masturbating.
Catherine, this is all you. She has 1 hour orgasms. I have never had one of those.
No, neither have I. And I think I heard about it from Mexi. Apparently there's like a podcast about masturbation where like people talked about, I mean, and pigs have managed it, and if pigs can do it, then like why can't we? I think there is actually a lot we could probably learn from animals and like masturbation as well. But yeah, I guess it's going back to our point about how we masturbate, we learn to masturbate in a certain way, we learn that masturbation is like one thing, and how it could actually open us up to the idea that we could there's like a whole new world of like forms of masturbating, like even the fact that I had an orgasm through my nipple, things like that like don't necessarily involve your genitals, like touching other parts of yourself, like thighs and neck, like I know the toes, like there's all sorts of sensuality, and there's all sorts of the possibilities of like having orgasms that could potentially last like an hour long and things like that. And actually it brings me another point I wanted to make in terms of like the harmful stuff, is that I think like this desire for lack of vulnerability and like control and knowing what you like and everything like that can also just open yourself up to not necessarily engaging with other types of bodies or other types of genders and things like that than what you're used to, because I think we're so afraid to like be in a sexual situation where we don't necessarily have an experience in, or we don't know that much about, or we haven't had seen that much representation. Because like I think part of my reason for mostly engaging with men, despite the fact that like I would like to engage with other people, is that I'm a cis man. I think it's because I'm like, oh, I know what to do, and I feel confident in this situation, and etc. etc. It's like this sense of, and I know like how to gain pleasure from this situation, and so it's like very known. And yeah, and I think like if we did have a more playful embracing of vulnerability and lack of control and lack of certainty kind of approach to sex, then we might be able to open ourselves up to like other types of bodies and other people. But yeah, 1 hour orgasms. Yeah, I guess I don't have much more to say about it because I haven't had one, but I think there are so many possibilities that are unexplored.
Yeah. I haven't had one either, because I haven't even listened to that podcast yet. I should listen to it. But I feel like 1 hour, I'm like, that's really intense. Like that's like,
A long
I don't know,
time.
like, you know, it's a long time to be like
I have a
climax.
lot of video games to play.
Yeah, like,
I don't know.
but definitely something to explore, at least like the kind of the drawn out, you know, orgasm. And you can like do that with yourself. I know that in like Adrienne Marie Brown, like she talked about like just like starting her day with like the very slow like clitoral massage or whatever, that like maybe you orgasm, maybe you don't, but like I think that that's the way to lead to that like hour orgasm. It's just like a very slow kind of like melodic thing. But anyway, I will BRB because my pregnancy bod is like I cannot go more than an hour without going to the bathroom. So just yeah,
Okay.
BRB.
And I think like tying into this, you know, there's things like people with penises can also have multiple orgasms. And for some reason, we don't talk about that. You know what I
I didn't
mean?
know that.
Yeah, it's very possible. So I think like
Wow.
exploring sensuality, exploring actual pleasure rather than just this kind of like, I don't want to demean anything, but I feel like a lot of masturbation is kind of like this frantic, you know, just race to a climax, and it's like very stimulated. So I think embracing for everyone, embracing this slow kind of exploratory, sensual, and maybe like an orgasm isn't necessarily the goal can be really helpful for everybody. Because that's another issue with the rhetoric around like masturbation and self-love is I feel like it's mostly, if not exclusively, targeted to women. And I don't see why like we wouldn't include men in that. You know, everyone can experience sensuality and intimacy and pleasure. And I think actually that's one of the biggest ways we could smash the patriarchy is for men to experience, you know, the wonders of like having their inner thighs touched, you know, to experience the sensation of like melting back and feeling open and exposed and vulnerable and like pliable. You know, I think that shift in power dynamics can be really powerful. And you know, so I think like we should make sure that we're always including everyone in these conversations, maybe needing to be tailored to certain groups at certain times depending on what we're talking about. But like I would love to see men get more open and exploratory with their bodies and to know what it feels like to have softer things feel good, to have certain areas of their bodies that they didn't think would like stimulation to be stimulated. You know, I think that that could be really fun for everybody.
Are you talking about prostates?
Not specifically, but sure.
Yeah,
I was talking in general about how like people with penises can actually have multiple orgasms as well, and like there is a pleasure gap I think for like cishet men that I think you know would really undermine the patriarchy if they could tap into
totally
a sensual experience with their bodies.
Totally. Yeah. And I think because a lot of cishet men are as well, like very uncomfortable with the idea of like stimulating their prostate or exploring that. But that's supposed to be because like I try to tell my partner, like when I have an orgasm, like it's like full body, you know, like it's like I feel it and then like it reverberates, like I can still feel it the next day, you know, like I have like an afterglow for a long time. And he was talking about like how his was just very like one and done, you know, and then like, and then it's nothing. Right. But I was reading and hearing that like a prostate orgasm is similar to that, like more kind of like embodied one. And I'm like, you probably would get an afterglow or something like that. Right. But I think, and I saw, was it, I I can't remember, but I something about how, like, you know, cis men were like talking about this, and a lot of them were saying that they were a lot more open to that kind of idea. But I think, you know, obviously the patriarchy makes it be like, oh, that is so taboo that like so many people will not even go there because that's gay, right? And yeah, it's like you're closing yourself off to like this whole world of pleasure and self-exploration, right? And you don't have to do that with a partner. Like you can start by, and this was what the program was recommending. They were like, just start with like a toy where you can like stimulate your own prostate and see if you enjoy it. And if you don't, like whatever, you know, you don't have to be in a situation with a partner and then like feel totally uncomfortable, you know, doing that, right? So,
especially if your partner doesn't know how,
what they're
has
doing.
never done it before. Yeah, so it could just be, I mean, again, that could be fun, right? Like if everyone's playful and into it, but I know it can be really vulnerable to ask for that.
Totally.
And then if both of you don't know what you're doing and you feel weird about it, it can be a little tough.
I also like that in terms of like the politics of penetration, that I feel much more comfortable when I'm with a partner where we've both had mutual penetration, because I think that it just, there's like such a vulnerability that comes from being the one penetrated. And I think that when you're engaging with a man who's also like being penetrated, or you're in the position, I think like he's more able to get a sense of what it's like to be in that position of like your body being able to like being penetrated by another person, how that feels, like the vulnerability, the potential pain, and the like how you can feel in that kind of situation. And I think yeah, like I don't know, I just really enjoy knowing that we've both had that kind of experience, and then feel more comfortable with that person to then yeah, engage with them, I guess. And yeah. I also wanted to talk about like masturbation on my period, and just like how much I think it can be helpful. It's not for everyone, obviously, but I think it can be so helpful to get rid of these ideas of like menstrual blood being like impure and disgusting, and something like really taboo that you want to get I don't know, never want anyone to see, and it's so embarrassing if anyone sees your blood and things like that. And I really see like masturbating in general just like as a form of art, and I love especially when I'm masturbating with like my period, how like the red color like on my fingers and on my body, and like it feels like I'm painting myself, and like the sheets and stuff. And it probably sounds weird. It probably sounds weird, but like I just think
Sounds
it's
like a lot of cleanup.
I was just thinking that sounds like
I was like the sheet.
I know, I have so much stain removal products that I use all the time. It's terrible.
But I know, I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
But yeah, like I don't know, it just seems like I think like ever since I started thinking of masturbation as art, or even like the thing with blowjobs, like just seeing it as like I'm writing a poem or something, I think there's a different engagement to the act that I'm like having than if I'm just like, yeah, trying to get to the moment of coming. It's just like a little dab here, a little stroke here, a little like color here, and then like see what you get. But yeah, I think that it's just like, I guess, a general point about like the kind of creativity of like masturbation can be, and even like the type of I really do think that one of the reasons I have a really good imagination is so intimately related to my masturbation, because I think like having like an hour session every day where I'm just like purely fantasizing and like exercising my imaginative muscles, I think just allows for like, yeah, the expansion of my imagination, because like I don't use porn, I just rely on my imagination. And then I think yeah, that like then feeds into like other aspects of my life where like I'm able to better visualize things, or yeah, like come up with creative ideas. Or I'm not saying like I'm an imagination genius or anything, but I think there is like a relationship there of that can be really helpful. And I also think there's something about like when you're masturbating as well, you know how they say when you go for a walk or you're in the shower and like ideas come to you, I think there's something about like the act of masturbation that makes me have like creative ideas like you suddenly, I guess it's that diffuse mode thinking thing where like you're thinking about something, you're doing something completely unrelated, and then suddenly like an idea comes up to you. So I suppose it's not necessarily masturbation in and of itself, but I did read this quote about how creativity and masturbation and the links, and this person called Gina Florio from Bustle, I don't know what Bustle is, but she said the most influential female writers and poets and artists from the Victorian and Edwardian era constantly gave us hints in their work about the sexual awakening that accompanied their incredible productivity in the arts. I'm realizing this sounds a bit liberal, but we'll go with it. With all the dopamine and oxytocin stomping around in our bodies after orgasm, women often become more intuitive, more positive, and more energized after orgasm. Yeah. I don't know how true this is, but I thought it sounded nice.
Yeah. Well, I think that like, yeah, there's definitely something to be said about like bringing in that kind of like playfulness to your own masturbation practices, because like, yeah, it is like you said, like it's totally fine if it is something that that does just become routine and whatever. But like, yeah, I think just like, you know, engaging with other people, like it can be nice to also kind of like bring that in. And I find that like I get more out of it when I am, I guess, a bit more like present and like playful, as opposed to like if I just go straight for like the orgasm, then you usually get those ones that are just kind of like, you know, where like it's not that satisfying. You're just kind of like, all right, like, yeah, whatever, you know, because you're not like building it up. You just kind of like went right for it with like no, you know, drawn out anticipation and like, yeah, not a lot of like, you know, playfulness, maybe playing around with like speed and like, you know, slowing down when you actually get close to climax, and then like kind of like restarting so that you kind of get back into it. So yeah, I mean, I think there is like a lot that you can like do there to like have a more pleasurable experience. But it's also like sometimes you're just tired. You're like, that's fine, you know, like get in, get out, like yeah.
Like brushing your teeth, like, all right, check that off for the night.
Yeah.
Did you have any more on that, Catherine?
No, not really on that particular point.
Okay.
Although I do think, again, going back to the imagination thing, I think that if we can start to like imagine different types of scenarios and things like that, I do think it can like feed into like decolonizing our attractions in general, and then that can lead to like feed into like how we view people in day-to-day life, and like we've talked about many times, like I think Mexi, you said once about how sex is like a microcosm of so many larger structures of oppression, and I think if we masturbate to like not like the typical violent stuff that we usually see, racist and sexist type of like pornified content, and instead have like our imaginations where we're like imagining totally different scenarios and things, I do think that could like massively impact how we relate to people in our day-to-day lives and who we engage with and who we're attracted to, and it can have like ripple effects more broadly.
Yeah, Paul asked a question. I've read somewhere that even imagining stuff during masturbation is kind of disconnecting yourself from what you're doing. Any thoughts on that? I mean, I feel like for me, like not imagining anything while I'm masturbating is like, because again, like I think with like the demisexuality stuff, like what's kind of like exciting for me is kind of the mindset and whatever. It's not so much just like the mechanics. So like if I'm just like doing a mechanical thing and not thinking about anything but like doing the mechanical thing, to me that's not terribly arousing, you know. But I see what you mean in terms of like, yeah, like to what extent is like, are you kind of like lapsing into escapism, or like it's, you know, it's like it's a line to walk of like where you are and like how present you are in that experience, you know.
Yeah, I think I can see the logic, but I also think like it's okay if you need to imagine like something.
Yeah.
You know, I have very few times when I masturbate that it's like actually coming from like physical sensations. It happens on occasion.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to like kind of stay in that. Like I might get turned on just by like my nipples getting hard because it's cold in the room.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, oh yeah, I have nipples.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, let me play with this for a little bit and have fun with that. And sometimes that can lead to an experience that is mostly like physical and coming from being very present in the sensations that I'm having, but it's very rare. But I think there's something to think about because I know, yeah, like a lot of times I can get really lost in what I'm thinking about. And then the physical stuff is almost like an afterthought. It's like a way to release that. And I don't know if that's bad per se, but I think it certainly could be good to have different types of experiences.
Yeah. It's a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also think that one of the benefits of masturbating as well can be that, like, as we've talked about, sex, or because of the patriarchy, we tend to get taught that like sex has to be tied to sexuality and to penises. And I think what I've noticed a lot of the time amongst friends is that I think when they don't have a relationship to their own bodies of like being able to give themselves pleasure, they tend to get more easily sucked into like staying with partners that are toxic because they have like a sexual dependence on them. And it's just like in the same way that we tell people to be financially independent of their like partners, I think it can be helpful also to have a certain level of like sexual independence of like, you're not the only person that I need to rely on in order to have my sexual needs met. I can also like pleasure myself. And I mean, like for myself, because I didn't start masturbating until I was 18, I started masturbating after I had sex, and like I would keep returning to this like toxic man, thinking that like he was the only way I could gain pleasure, even though looking back, like it was terrible. Sex was really bad. But I didn't have any like ways of pleasuring myself, because I couldn't figure out how to make myself come for a really long time. And even when I did start masturbating, and so I was like really engaging in this, these like getting hooked to this person as like the only means of sexual gratification. And I mean, it's nuanced because obviously we talked about how like, you know, getting away from hyper independence and individuality and toxic girl boss, whatever. But at the same time, I think some level of like sexual independence can be, or sexual autonomy can be helpful. I think these like situations are so tricky because it's so nuanced. It's like, we want a bit of independence, not too much, maybe not too much, but like, there's like some nice balance in the middle, I think.
Yeah, but I think that there is a lot to that as well, because I know that like for example, when my ex and I broke up and I moved to this new place by myself, and like I'm very introverted, very demisexual, and I just wasn't really up for much of anything. Like I was online dating for a bit, but it just like was not I just wasn't up for it, you know? And I felt like that was like a really amazing year of growth for me in terms of like coming into myself, learning to love my own company. Like I did everything by myself. I went camping by myself, whatever. And I just felt like so happy, genuinely. And like, part of that was obviously like reconnecting with myself and my body and like my masturbation practices and stuff. And I got to a place where I'm like, I know that like, no matter what, I will be happy forever, even if I'm alone. Like I will be very content, like with my own company. And like with my own connection to self. And I think that's like incredibly powerful. Because then you're in a place where it's like, like obviously like I could be open to something else, but like not like needing that is just, incredibly powerful. I mean, obviously like you're never going to be totally independent, like, right. You're going to have friends, hopefully you're going to have community, but like not necessarily needing that like romantic, or like not like privileging a romantic connection or a sexual connection above other connections, or the connection that you can have with yourself is, I think, amazing, you know? So yeah.
Yeah.
I also just wanted to address, Cassandra asked, I don't really have an answer, but I'm wondering how effective people with vaginas, penises is for conversations about enjoying sex, especially since the hormones in one's body can change so much. And yeah, I honestly don't have an answer as well. And I feel like I'm always a bit like clumsy on streams like this, especially when we're talking about heterodynamics, because like we'll say men and women, but then that isn't necessarily always the best language. So then we'll say people with penises or vaginas, which again isn't always the best language. It's like it's really hard to talk about things at all, you know, in like yeah, like we're trying to smash gender, but then it's like, well, how do we talk about things? So I don't have an answer, but yeah, I just wanted to throw
and there's
that out
so
there.
much like with the trans experience, you know, being on
Exactly.
hormones, if you're taking hormones, can also very much change like how your sex organs function and what you want to do with
Yes.
them. So like that's a whole
Yeah.
thing. So yeah, we're just doing our
Yeah.
clumsy best.
Yeah, there's like not a good way. Like you'd have to like say everything specifically, you know. So we're doing our clumsy best.
Yeah.
Well, this was great. Unless you have more points.
I just had a few notes on queering masturbation.
Oh, yes,
I feel like that would, and I have a closing quote, so
Excellent.
we could end with that. Unless Catherine, did you have anything else you wanted to get in on?
I would just mention the list of health benefits of masturbation. Improve sleep, boost immune system, prevent cervical and urinary infections, tone pelvic muscle, ease backache, sleep aid, increases pain tolerance. Increases pain tolerance? That's interesting. Less prone to heart disease and diabetes, menstrual cramps, relieve built-up stress, sleep better, boost mood, prevent anxiety, depression, relax, feel pleasure and enjoyment, and release sexual tension and improve self-esteem.
Wonderful.
That is wonderful. They should bottle it up and sell it. Eastern Screech Owl said that they can verify 7 months into estrogen and things are wildly different. So yeah, I've read a lot of, especially from trans women, how like being on estrogen can just really change things. To that point, queering masturbation. So I just wanted to say, we did mention in the beginning that not everyone masturbates, and that's fine. Not everyone wants to. I do also want to clarify that people on the asexual spectrum may or may not masturbate. Some do, and like that's normal. And I think that confuses a lot of people because it's like, how do you not want to have sex but you masturbate? And it just makes sense. It makes just, you know, you like a lot of ace people might masturbate because of the health benefits. Literally, it can be relaxing. And also there's a difference between arousal and a desire to have sex. People, I think rape culture honestly like conflates the two, and that can cause a lot of violence or misunderstandings or whatever. But yeah, you can be aroused and not necessarily want to have sex with someone else. Those are two different things. So yeah, ace people can experience arousal and may want to release that arousal. Anyway, so just to put that out there, want to represent my ace peeps. And then there's a lot of ways to queer sex. I included in the show notes an article called like 3 Sexperts Talk About Queering Masturbation that I recommend everyone read. It's not that long, but I thought it had a lot of good points in it. And there's things that you can do. So there's a lot of ways to explore your own sexual and gender identities. And this is where sex toys can actually be really helpful. So for instance, if you're perhaps a cis man and you're thinking maybe you're gay or maybe you're bisexual, you could get a dildo and give it a blowjob, you know, and see what that feels like for you. Is that a turn on? It doesn't necessarily mean that you're gay or bisexual, but it can be part of like safely exploring, engaging with things in a different way where you don't have to be with someone else and feeling that pressure of like, oh, I don't really know yet if this is something I want to do. You can like try wearing a dildo or a strap-on or I forget what they're called. There's a name for them, but like you can, that's not really masturbating necessarily, but you can wear stuff around You can try dressing up. So you could try putting on maybe some lingerie that none of us are interested in, if it's interesting to you. You can try maybe putting on some lingerie and like touching yourself and seeing how that feels. You can try anal play, even just touching your butt crack, for lack of a more elegant word. Just seeing, because people always think of like anal stuff as penetration, and then that is made like gay. I famously fucking hate anal penetration. I will tell everyone all the time, stay away from my butt. But I actually do really like stimulation around there. I just often don't trust anyone enough to like be in that area. But like sometimes even when I shower, sometimes I'll kind of like touch myself in that area, and it actually feels really good. And I know that like I can trust myself. So I think for people, especially again like cishet men, where you feel like your butt is this, like if anything goes near it, you're gay. Start, like just touching around in there and exploring a little bit and just see if you like it. And you can try penetration if you want, but it doesn't necessarily need to be that. It can just be more of a sensual kind of exploration. And then there's so much you can do with fantasizing. I've talked about on other streams, but I kind of came to a place where I realized that I was pansexual, but I still had a lot of genital repulsion, and I had a hard time like reconciling that. And honestly, fantasizing and masturbating was the way that I worked through it. It took me a long time, but I started fantasizing about being with girls, being with people with vaginas, and what that could look like. And for me, like I've always been very attracted to breasts. So like the fantasies kind of started there. And it took a while, but like over time, I got to a point where I was like, oh, that would actually be really fun. And I definitely could see myself engaging with someone sexually who had these, this kind of genitalia. And it got me over that hump of like having all of this internalized dialogue about vaginas. So, it's a safe place where you can start to explore your gender and your sexuality in that way. You can take on different gender roles in your head. You can think about different, I think about using a strap-on with everybody, and that feels really fun. So it's like a fun way to kind of like start to explore that and work through some stuff that you may have as you kind of figure out your things. Even saying things out loud. So just like saying whatever it is, like speaking almost as if there was someone else in the room, and seeing how it feels for you to say certain things. You can refer to your genitalia in any way you want. So you can, if you have a penis, you can call it a pussy. Like there's no rules. You can explore in whatever way you want and see how that feels to, say out loud, like, fuck my pussy, daddy. So, and none of this has to mean that you're queer. Like queering, we talk about this a lot, but like queering a practice doesn't mean that you are now saying like, oh, I am gay. That's not the point. It can help you if you are queer to kind of get more comfortable with and sort of get in touch with what that identity or identities are. But it's something that I actually think the cishets should really do a lot more of, because it's very liberatory. It's really about just getting rid of these scripts that we have and these boundaries that we have for how we're supposed to perform in these roles, and realizing that we all, like all of us who have genitalia, who get sexually aroused, like we all experience pleasure. It's like, it doesn't matter if I use a vibrator on my vagina or I use a vibrator on someone's taint, and that feels good for them, then who cares? Like we're all having a beautiful sexual experience. So I think it can help break those boundaries, and just get rid of these ideas. In that article, one of the Sexperts talks about like, she's talked to men with penises who like actually, like the way they masturbate is almost more like what you would do to a clit. And they're really embarrassed about it, because that's not how society tells them they're supposed to masturbate, right? It's too feminine.
But it is just a big clit on the end of a stick.
know. On a big stick. Got your clit on a stick here, man. Exactly. So and you know, like with clits, like you can jerk them off if you want to. Like you can masturbate in any kind of way. So it's about like breaking down those barriers and not being stuck in what our identities or how people identify us is supposed to mean for how we are in our own bodies and with ourselves, and then eventually, if we want, with other people. And I think that can be, you know, really empowering, and that's very queer, and it's very safe. You know, it's something you can just do by yourself and take it as far as you want to take it and take it as public as you want to take it. Someone I slept with, for instance, like, you know, I'm very queer when it comes to sex, and like he discovered through our playing together that like he really loves like having his inner thighs touched and like kind of being like splayed open, you know, having his thighs touched in a position that would be seen as like feminine and not safe, but like, you know, it was like we had a safe space where he was able to discover that and realize that it was something he really, really liked, you know, and to kind of like do it in a way that he got used to it and make like break down that fear a little bit and break down that shame and, you know, whatever feelings were holding him back through that. And then the last thing I'll say is just play with switching mediums. So this goes to, someone asked a really good question earlier and I was like pinned it. Anyway, sorry, whoever this is, I don't know who to credit, but they asked about, you know, a lot of these talks focus, like, what about when you are so hooked on like visual stimulation and how we don't talk about other forms of stimulation? And so I would say, like, play with that. You know, if you're someone who always watches porn, can you put on an audiobook? There's erotic fiction. You know, you could put on an audiobook, or I'm sure there's podcasts now that you can listen to. Can you read something? Can you use your own mind? There's, you know, read some fanfic. Like, it doesn't even have to be straight up erotica. So I think, like, yeah, I would say definitely play with switching stuff around. My high school partner, for some reason, was really into jazz. And I used to get so fucking horny when she would put on jazz records. So it's like, who knows? Who knows what's going to turn you on? But like, just play with stuff, you know, try changing your stimulus and see if you can find new pathways, because you're going to have to come up with like new fantasies and scenarios to make the different mediums work. So that's fun, you know? And if you're exploring your queerness, then it's also a great way. There's so much good queer erotica out there. That can also be a fun way to get into some of that and see how you feel hearing a story about, you know, two girls kissing or whatever. And I will end this with, I'll share this so we can read it as I read it. Share screen. I always forget how that's works. I just want to say,
firstly, that Cassandra said made me think of smell-o-vision, and yeah, I definitely I like that term. And Eastern Screech Owl, what a great name, said, plus sex noises are amazing to do voice practice if that's something you're working on. And
I love that.
Yeah, and I also just love, I know this is not the same thing that you're mentioning, but I found that to be something like really liberating about, like, I'm like incredibly loud when I masturbate, and I know a lot of people aren't, like, a lot of people are completely silent, but there's something about like always having been taught to be like small and innocent and quiet and I don't know, just like speak softly and, you know, all these like typical gendered things that you're like taught. There's something about like my wild pig grunting noises that is just so liberating, because it's like you would never expect that noise to come from me. It's so different from like how I normally seem. But honestly, it's like one of my flatmates was like came into my, well, didn't come into my room, but was like really concerned about what was going on in my room, and I think it's like a wild animal or something. But it's like a way of taking up space, just being being like, fuck, I don't care. Like I don't know, like my wild inner like beast is coming out, and it's like a ferociousness and like accessing a sort of rage. I don't know, I can't explain it, but it's really empowering.
I have such a mental image of your like enraged pig masturbation moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, yes, like I'm again, a lot of my masturbating is just kind of like a routine, you know, non-deal, but sometimes I like yell out or make some noise, and there is something kind of great about taking up that space by yourself, and just, you know, I think like, oh, if any of my neighbors do overhear me, I don't know, there's just something nice about like, I'm doing this to myself. I'm not like performing for a partner. There's no one else here. It's just like, I have made myself feel this good, or I'm in such a mindset that like, that's something I want to do. I think that can be great. Eastern Screechall also said this: for me, visualizing my genitals transforming into a vagina turned my masturbation into a very affirming spiritual experience, and it was an excellent way for me to explore my gender. So I feel like that's wonderful. And I feel like, yeah, for a lot of trans people, like for myself, I don't have a lot of dysphoria, so I feel like I can't speak on it too much, but like I do hate how big and heavy my breasts are, and I feel like it does give me dysphoria. So it is nice during those times when like my nipples get hard because it's cold, and then I can like actually have an experience of enjoying them and just kind of accepting them as part of my body. And I think for the trans experience, it's, you know, it's complicated. Like a lot of times our genitalia can be the source of discomfort. But I think, you know, if we can embrace masturbation as a way to find, you know, some affirmation and some self-love and some way through, then it can be a really beautiful thing. I don't think that that kind of pleasure should be cut off from us at all. Oh, yes, Paul. Paul said there's this porn where you only see people's faces as they masturbate, which can help if you're too focused on genitals. And it's also just hot in general. Yeah, it's called The Little Death. It's Le Petit Mort. I don't remember how to say it. It's French. But I used to watch that when I was younger, and it was like the hottest fucking thing. And all you see is someone's face as they're having an orgasm. And it's like amazing. So very good recommendation. Okay, so now we'll end with this quote. So this comes from Jiz Lee, who is a non-binary porn artist. I love porn actors, and drag queens always have the best the best names. And they said, this is in that article that I link below, but they said, I believe if people allow themselves in honesty around their fantasies without shame, and it's okay to acknowledge fantasies around power and taboo, then perhaps there is no border between sex that is queer and that which is not. People of all genders and orientations can enjoy all kinds of sexual sensations, and so queering masturbation might simply mean to go with your body's responses as opposed to a cookie-cutter idea of what you think masturbation should be. Sex is unique, or queer if you will, because while some things might be considered common, there's really no such thing as normal. And I just thought that was a perfect way to end the stream.
Yeah.
Lovely.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well,
all right,
thanks,
everyone.
Guys. This was super fun.
It was fun.
Yeah, I love this so much. Yeah, just as a reminder that we have our Patreon, where the donations are going to Gina. We also have Gina Nicole's sister, and we also have Gina's fundraiser and PayPal. Any kind of contribution at all would be incredibly helpful, and would really go a long way. And yeah, thank you so much for listening. Is there any final thoughts that you two wanted to say?
No, I think we covered it all. But yeah, thanks, Catherine, for suggesting a great topic.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much for being here with us.
Thanks, comrades. And we don't know what the next one is yet, but we'll see you there.
We'll let you know.
Yeah. All right, bye.
Bye, everyone.